Hi everyone. Welcome to our next panel on Bi Plus Books. We're going to start with a talk by Laura Clarke, who is an award-winning sex and gender specialist and author. Might I add, with a wonderful Instagram account if you're not following already. Huge fan. She delivers RSC to young people and queer inclusivity training to professionals in all industries. And the first book, Step by Step, The Ultimate Guide for Bisexual, Pansexual, and Queer Young People, came out just last month. Highly recommend it. Laura, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. That was such a nice introduction. You'll have to bear with me. I'm a little bit sick today, so I'm going to try and speak as loudly as I can, but I do have a bit of a sore throat. So if I go a bit raspy or I sound like I have a frog in my throat, it's probably because I do. I'm going to share my screen. I've got some slides for you. And yeah, I just wanted to talk to you all a little bit about my new book, Step by Step, which came out, you said last month, and that has really made me feel like time is passing way too quickly. So it was last month because it's now October. It's technically about 2 weeks ago it came out. And it is, I'll talk a bit more about it in a second. But first of all, let me introduce myself. So my name is Laura Clarke. My pronouns are she, they. And you can find me online at My Body and Yours. Thank you for the shout out to the Instagram account. Really appreciate it. And yeah, a little bit about me. I mean, there was some stuff in the introduction there. But I do quite a few things. I've sort of really broadly given myself the title of like sex and gender specialist because I feel like I wear a number of hats, but all of the things that I do sort of sit within that overarching kind of title. So first of all, I'm a sex and relationships educator. So I go into schools, I talk to young people, I do the talks that teachers often don't want to do, and deal with all of the giggling. And I really love that part of my job. It's great. But then I also do LGBT training to hospitals, teachers, charities, businesses, anybody really who wants to create a better working environment for their service users or their colleagues even, and just trying to improve sort of visibility of LGBT identities and experiences. Um, I'm also a consultant, so I work with lots of different people. That's such a broad title, but I've worked on children's books as resources. I've worked on designing training modules, anything that sort of needs a specialist for LGBT stuff, specifically bi stuff as well, is obviously my specialism. Anything that needs looking over for sort of sensitivity, accuracy, inclusivity, that's very much my sort of wheelhouse. And then finally, which is what you're all here to hear me talk about, I'm the author of Step by Step. So, what is Step by Step? The full title is Step by Step, the ultimate guide for bisexual, pansexual, and queer young people. It is the first bi plus handbook for specifically for teenagers. More specifically, it's for sort of ages 13 to 18, although I've been getting some really lovely reviews online from people who are older, people who are in their 40s saying that they really liked it. So I hope it appeals to all ages, but that's the age group that we're targeting. And it's published by Jessica Kingsley Publishers. This is a bit of a chapter breakdown, so you can sort of get a sense of what the book is about. So we start by talking about LGBTQIA plus identities more broadly, because I think that sometimes if you Google things about queer identities, you can get maybe misinformation or conflicting information. So I really wanted to start the book with a chapter more broadly about LGBT identities. And I say, you might be bi and you might be exploring that part of yourself, but that might not be the only part of your identity. You might also be exploring your gender, or you might have a friend that is, under a different letter of the acronym that you need to support and be an ally to. So I really wanted to start it with that sort of very basic 101. Then it goes into bi plus identities and covers a sort of wide range of different identities under that sort of bi plus umbrella, which I believe I have on the next slide. So under the bi plus umbrella, and I sort of talk a little bit about how you might want to be trying to find your label and navigate what that looks like, and the sort of challenges that come with that, and how you don't have to force yourself to fit into a box. But for some people, labels can be really, really helpful. And I talk about how there are sort of broadly speaking, a lot of these identities have a lot of similarities, and for some people, they might sort of say, "Oh, well, these are the same thing." I don't personally see why you define yourself as one over another, but for other people, those distinctions are really important, and that's why it's important we're respecting people sort of where they are at. So I talk all about that in bi plus identities. Then I go on to chapter 3. I talk about sort of myths and misconceptions, which is where we break down all of the different sort of negative or harmful myths or just incorrect myths or stereotypes about bisexuality. Um, Chapter 4, just a phase, is what I'm going to talk more about today. So I'll leave that for just in a second. Representation and biphobia, these are really sort of both sort of exploring biphobia, I guess, but the representation is more about kind of how that is presented within media, and then biphobia is more about sort of like systemic biphobia, so in healthcare, in education, in the law, in all of these different kind of systems. Intersectional Identities is a chapter that was co-written by 4 other people, so myself being 5, and it covers bi plus women, bi plus men, bi plus trans and non-binary people, bi plus people of colour, and bi plus disabled people. And I really wanted it to be sort of like an introduction to intersectionality for young people, to start thinking about how different bi plus people might have different experiences, different barriers, intersecting ways of experiencing oppression. Coming out pretty much does what it says on the tin. It guides young people through coming out and how they might want to do that and the different challenges they might face there, and how to sort of like pick the right time, place, person. And then chapters 9 and 10, very much my sort of wheelhouse, is dating and sex and how they can meet other bi plus young people. And if they're starting to think about sex, how can that be done safely? And what is sort of like an inclusive sex education, because they might not necessarily be getting that at school. So that's sort of like a whistle-stop tour of step by step. The reason that I wrote this book is because I really noticed that there was a lack of sort of bi-specific stuff out there, literature out there specifically aimed at teenagers. So there wasn't anything when I was growing up. I really felt like I was missing that. And even now, as an adult, I sort of feel like I've been in my early 20s. I felt like I was playing catch up with sort of doing the introductory stuff about bisexuality. And I realized that there's some fantastic books out there, but all of them are quite they can be quite heavy, and they can be quite academic in places, which is so important. But if you're looking for sort of like that introduction, if you're a 13-year-old, that could be quite inaccessible, and it could make you feel a bit put off. So what I really wanted to do was to have this really specific resource and to bridge a gap in bi plus literature. So in my head, my sort of like dream scenario is that I'm helping sort of the future bi plus activists, the people that are going to be presenting at this conference in 10, 20 years. I really want to help them get their foot on the ladder. And I think the younger we can do that, the better, to get people thinking about queer theory, bi theory, their own identities, how we can be better allies to everyone in the queer community. I love the idea of this book being a bridge, so that they start with my book, but then maybe they, as they get older, they go on to the other bi literature that's out there, which is absolutely amazing. And we can start to sort of recruit more young bi plus people into queer activism and you know, protesting for all of our rights. I think that's really important. And then finally, I think I wanted something that could be read by a parent who maybe felt, you know, their child might have come out as bisexual and they might be really confused, don't know where to start, and they sort of need that 101 guide of sort of like what is appropriate to talk to your young person about. Other allies, that could include teachers, it could include friends, but anybody that would be supporting a young bi plus person, I hope would be able to read this book and get something from it. And then I like the idea of parents reading it and then giving it to their children so that they can kind of have conversations about what they've both read. So that's my kind of fantasy or my little dream for this book. So I want to talk to you a little bit more about that chapter 4, It's Just a Phase, because when I was writing the book, one of the things that in the bi myths and misconceptions chapter, I got to the It's Just a Phase sort of myth, and I realized that I had a lot more to say about that specific myth than I did maybe about the others, and that actually it felt like it really warranted its own chapter. And the reason for that is because I think that is the one that is very specifically or mostly aimed at bi plus young people, because there's this idea that they don't know themselves or their identity is evolving and changing. And I really wanted to just dive into that a little bit more. So I started thinking about, okay, I'm actually going to sort of start by playing devil's advocate a little bit and saying, okay, well, what if your bisexuality was just a phase? What if that was just a short period of your life that you identified as bi? What would that mean? Would that be such a bad thing? And I sort of talk about all of the reasons that hypothetically somebody's bisexuality could be a phase. So sexuality is fluid. We know that it can change over time. There are multiple people who have come out as bi and then come out as gay, lesbian, straight afterwards. We know that that is very much something that can change. Life can be very long and we can change as people. We know that some people do identify as bi before they identify as gay or lesbian. That can sometimes be because they're testing the waters and they feel that bi might be a more palatable identity to some people. It could be because they really do believe that they're bi because of compulsory heterosexuality. So it could just be that that's their journey. There's so many reasons, but we do know that that happens. So I think it's important that we talk about it and we don't deny that that is a part of many people's journeys. And then I talk about how phases are really valid. And I think the analogy I use in the book is if you were a guitar player for 10 years and then you decided you didn't want to play the guitar anymore, it's not that you weren't a guitar player for 10 years. People aren't going to go, oh, well, you weren't really a guitar player. It was just a phase. Two things can be true at once. You were a guitar player, you were bi, and it was a phase, and that doesn't take away from the validity. And then I sort of call out Lady Gaga a little bit. And I talk about Born This Way through the song because I think that's an interesting way to talk about it. But I talk about the Born This Way movement and I can really recognize all of the positive things that the Born This Way movement have done for the queer community. I think that's really important. But I sort of say, I think the phrase I use is it makes us almost apologetic in our queerness. It's sort of this like, oh, I can't help it. I was born this way. If I could do something about it, I would, but I can't help it. And there's an article, a Cosmopolitan article by Lois Shearing, who is an author and a journalist. And they say, if bisexuality was a choice, I would choose it any day. And I really want people to sort of, and like young people to start to think about this idea of like, we don't just have to be sort of like, oh, well, I can't help it. We know that sexuality isn't a choice, but if it was, would that be such a bad thing? And this idea of sexuality can be just as valid, even if it's not this lifelong from birth identity. And then I talk about all the reasons that bisexuality is likely not a phase. So I kind of do the other side of the argument. I talk about the Lisa Diamond study, which was a 10-year study, which was tracking the identities of, I believe, young women. And 92% of the original group who identified as bisexual after 10 years either identified as bisexual or unlabeled and didn't switch to a monosexual sexuality. So there's some concrete proof there that we know that bisexuality is real. We know that even if you are a young person, 10 years later, you can still, but most people will still be identifying as bi. And I talk about how some bisexuality might be a phase. So for some people, bisexuality might be a phase. But that doesn't mean that all bisexuality is a phase. And I think that's the really important distinction to make there. Renee Rapp last year initially identified as bi and then came out as a lesbian and said, tweeted something like, if I say I'm a lesbian, I'm a lesbian. And if someone else says they're bi, then they're bi. And it can be that simple. Your journey might be that actually you realize bi wasn't the right label for you. It was a phase. But that doesn't mean that you need to project that onto other people. And I think that's really important. And I talk about bi plus Ld as being living proof. There's still bisexual hashtag and movements with plenty of people who are bisexual into their 60s, 70s, 80s, beyond. And we have those stories and we know that bisexuality itself isn't a phase, but if it is for some people individually, that is okay. And we can welcome people into the community. It doesn't have to be this lifetime subscription. It can just be for that time. And then I say, okay, well, if we know that some bisexuality can be a phase, then what's the actual harm in this myth? Why is it something that we shouldn't say that bisexuality is a phase? And I sort of break down like what people say, the statements that people say, and then what might be meant or heard behind those statements. So it's just a phase. It very well could be, but I think what is meant by that or what is heard by the bi plus young person is bisexuality isn't real. Sort of making that broad generalization. When someone says you'll grow out of it to a young person, what they're probably hearing from that is you're too young to know your own mind. When somebody says everyone thinks they're bi at one point or another, it's giving that message of this is only okay if it's temporary. It's not okay if it's a lifelong thing. And when someone says you'll pick a side eventually, I think what people hear is any other sexuality would be better than bisexuality. I'm hoping that you fall into one of those categories of gay or straight, because any other sexuality would be better than this. So we can see that even though the things that are being said might be factually true, they could be correct, who knows? Actually, the harm is what is meant behind those statements. And I just want to read you, before I wrap up, I want to read you a very quick quote. So this is a bit in the book where I talk about, I talk directly to parents, allies, people who are supporting bi plus young people. So I say, regardless of whether or not their bi plus identity is a phase, how you react to them coming out will influence whether they figure out this part of themselves with you or without you. If you, upon their coming out, patronize them, disbelieve them, or discourage them, one of two potential scenarios occur. One, your loved one, after a lot of soul searching, realizes that bi, pan, queer isn't an accurate description of their sexuality. Having made this discovery without your support, they are now less likely to share their new identity label with you. If this new identity is queer in any way, so for example, gay, lesbian, asexual, they might fear that your reaction to another queer identity would be equally negative. And if they realize they're straight, they may avoid sharing this information in anticipation in anticipation of an infuriating "I told you so." Your loved, and then option two, your loved one continues to identify as bi, pan, or queer. The supposed phase lasts their whole life. And while they may resume a relationship with you, the chances are they will always remember your initial reaction and never feel wholly accepted in their bi-ness. But if you're supportive, no matter what the outcome, your loved one will always remember being listened to, believed, and accepted. They'll recognize you as a safe person to be themselves with, even if that self changes over the weeks, months, or years. So I think that's what's really important, is just kind of meeting people where they're at. And I hope that people who are working with bi plus young people will put aside those feelings of, this could be a phase, even if, that's been debunked. But this idea of that this could be a phase, does it really matter if it's a phase? As long as we're recognizing people in that moment. And if that changes, they will know that you're supportive and they will come to you. That's me. I've come to the end of my time. So please do follow me online. I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram. Those are the only real places that I am online. So please do follow me on there at My Body and Yours. And if you would like to buy the book, if you have a young bi plus or pan person in your life, there's a QR code there that takes you to purchasing the book from a queer bookstore, which I'm a big advocate for, as well as buying it from sort of queer indie bookstores. So that link will take you there. But thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you, Laura. You've been incredible. Your work is incredible. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I would now love to introduce Bailey Merlin and the Bi Plus Books Gang. So Bailey Merlin, MFA and SM, is the author of A Lot of People Live in This House and a Bi Plus activist with a background in media and medicine. She's the co-creator of the podcast Bisexual Killjoy and founder of the Bi Plus Book Gang, an international writers group. She holds an MFA from Butler University and an SM from Harvard Medical School. She's a board member and events chair for the Bisexual Resource Center, one of the oldest Bi Plus organizations in the world. Her writing has been published in literary magazines such as I don't know how to pronounce that. The Lascaux Review, Honeyfire Literary Magazine, Bandit Fiction, Anti-Heroin Chic, Chantwood Magazine, Drunk Monkeys, Dime Show Review, among others. She's based in Boston and lives in an intentional community built with a dynamic cast of humans, a dog, a cat, and a friendly ghost. We'll put her website in the chat, and I will turn on her pre-recorded talk now.
Pages, you have short stories and poems and essays and pieces of art from 36 contributors from around the world, and they are all writing to one theme, which is bi plus erasure. And I know many of us in this room are intimately familiar with bi plus erasure, either as just regular people or as researchers, and we know the implications that bi plus erasure have on
We can see the video. Now I see it.
Hi everyone, my name is Bailey Merlin and I am the proud editor of By All Accounts, an anthology. And inside these pages you have short stories and poems and essays and pieces of art from 36 contributors from around the world. And they are all writing to one theme, which is bi plus erasure. And I know, many of us in this room are intimately familiar with bi plus erasure, either as just regular people or as researchers. And we know the implications that bi plus erasure have on the lives of everyday bi plus people. And given how much we talk about bi plus erasure, just as researchers, just as bi plus civilians, if you will, I was resistant to this idea that our first issue would be around bi plus erasure. It's not groundbreaking material in that way, right? Every anthology about bi plus experiences talks about erasure. It's certainly something that's been written at length about in Bi Women Quarterly by contributors from around the world for decades. And I think that's what makes bi plus erasure the universal bi plus experience. And once I got over that, I realized, okay, well, let's write about it. And was not prepared for the number of submissions that we got and also the depth and breadth of angles people took towards bi plus erasure. But before I can tell you how By All Accounts is actually more than just a book, it's more than an anthology, I need to tell you about the Bi Plus Book Gang, which I founded in 2023 after graduating from Harvard Medical School with my Master of Science in Media, Medicine, and Health. And it's the intersection of healthcare and storytelling. And my project had been about bi plus erasure, creating negative health outcomes for bi plus people, which is not news to many of us in this room, but it was news to me, and it was news to most of the people I was talking to then. And in that project, I interviewed 40 bi plus people across the United States. And for those who were not actively engaged in advocacy work, they weren't actively engaged in bi plus specific advocacy, most of them said they didn't have a queer community or they weren't allowed to be a part of a queer community, and so they kind of minimized their identities. And we didn't talk about chronic illness, we didn't talk about mental health. It certainly came up in the qualitative review in these interviews, but it wasn't something that was like explicitly interviewed on. Um, and so I was like, neat. And I wrote up my paper, I wrote my capstone, and I graduated. And the week I graduated, I published my first novel. And I realized that I was another sad bisexual writer who had no fucking community. And I was looking around wondering, how did that happen? So I started looking for friends. I started looking for writing groups. But the writing groups I would go to, it was either folks who were writing for fun, which is totally cool, but they weren't there for the critical analysis of their work. They weren't there to get better. They were just there to decompress. And I'm like, okay, not for me. And then I joined a queer writing group and I was talking about my bi plus historical romance and immediately was told, well, that's straight. That's just a straight romance because she's with a guy. And I was a little taken aback because here was that bi plus erasure that I'd been told about. And I wanted to say, I don't even have time to tell you how harmful what you're saying is right now. So fuck you. So I just left. I ghosted. Don't love that about me. I really should have stayed to educate, but you can't win every battle. And eventually you just say, fuck it, I'll do it myself. Because if there's one thing Bi Plus community runs on, it is spite. And the Bi Plus booking was formed. We had 7 people in those early days. And now, 2 years later, if you can believe it, over 150 individuals from around the world. We are on every continent. One of our Chilean members said, technically Chile and Antarctica are the same. So you're really on all of the continents. I'm like, all right, I'll take it as a gimme. And when I tell you I could have 1,000 people in this group, I mean it. But what I do to ensure that community is built is I interview every single person who comes into the group. With fascism being on the rise, now it feels like something that's done more out of necessity for safety, but it's always like I want to know people on an individual level when they come in. I want them to know that there's at least one person who knows their story, is invested in their stories before they enter into a larger group of people. So here's the bit that I wasn't expecting, was that the Bi Plus booking got populated really quickly. And I, in my heart of hearts, would say kind of jokingly at the beginning, my goal is to have 1,000 Bi Plus writers connected from around the world. And then all of a sudden we were growing we were like at 100 way too fast. And I was like, oh, 1,000 people is a lot of people. And so we, like took back the marketing a little bit. Like, you know what, we'll grow slowly as we want to and need to. And one of the original members, Valencia Jean-Francois, came to me and said, I want to do a conference. And I said, oh, like a what, like a Bi Plus Writers Conference? And they said, yeah, I would love to do that. And I said, well, we don't have any money. And so they suggested, well, what if we made a book and all the proceeds went to supporting that conference? And I was like, okay. So what wound up happening is Valencia focused on the conference, and all of a sudden I was in charge of the anthology. And that's fine. That's how things happen sometimes. We all lean into our strengths. And I was able to reach out to members of the community and say, does anyone want to be on the reading team? Can I have screeners? Can someone help me build a website? Does anyone have experience doing outreach? Can someone help me promote this? How do you self-publish? How do you do this? How do you do that? And because we had spent so much time building a community, I had well over 20 people involved in the screening of this book, the preparing of this book, and while ultimately the editing decisions were on me and the big structural things were on me, I could not have done it without that village. And people were really excited about this. This was over a year's worth of work that went into this book, and so many hands have touched it, right? And when I finally started to finalize all of the details and reach out to the writers and let them know, hey, that's going to be published, everyone was really excited. And there are a few people in here who were not out at the time of publication, but are now out. And honestly, I think it's just really important that you hear from some of the writers themselves.
I'm a romance writer, so all of my books, even though many of them are very queer and they have bi plus characters in them, they all have happy endings. And for the most part, they all have a really positive message, no matter what kinds of topics that they tackle in the plot of the story. So when I set out to write a nonfiction piece about my own life, and a poem at that was really vulnerable for me, and it was really scary, and I would not have been able to show this piece to anybody were it not for the support of the Bi Plus Book Gang and Bailey Merlin, and knowing that this was an anthology for and by Bi Plus people about Bi Plus issues.
Hi, I'm Brianne Lombardi, also known as Nurse Bean. 1 year ago, I came out to myself as bisexual at the age of 30, and then I didn't know what to do next. This was a dark, confusing time, so I picked up a pen and began translating my pain into art. Once I found out I would be published alongside bisexual authors from all over, I couldn't sit with being in a book on bisexual erasure while actively keeping my identity invisible because I was too scared to come out. So, by all accounts, me and my published poem, Extinguished Flames, came out together. It took my petrified yearning for more hand and said, you can do this because you're not alone. Thank you so much. By all accounts, you'll forever mean the world to me.
Being part of By All Accounts was very important for me because I still remember how small and lonely I felt after my coming out at the age of 20. And being part of this book, along with the other 35 authors, is my service to the Bi Plus community to help the following generations to feel less alone and to face less biphobia and bi erasure. Thank you.
When we set out to do this anthology, I don't think any of us expected the response that we got. Not just in terms of submissions, right? I was overwhelmed by the number of submissions. I said, if we get 50, I'll feel good. And then we got more than double that. But honestly, from the authors themselves, this is the first time I've ever written down that I'm bi. I'm coming out. I told my partner that I'm bisexual. I'm pansexual. I'm somewhere under the Bi Plus umbrella. I didn't realize that a book could be a community. And Bi Plus people aren't often offered community. I've interviewed over 200 people for the Bi Plus Book Gang with over 150 members. And when I talk to them about it, I've never encountered a space like this that's just for me. Perhaps it shouldn't be a surprise then that an anthology offers an opportunity for community, that a book offers a space for community. But something I've been reflecting on more and more is that By All Accounts is just one submission to a long lineage of Bi Plus anthologies, of Bi Plus books that nobody fucking talks about. I recently was going to drop off some things for the Bisexual Resource Center here in Boston. I'm a board member there. And I was going through the boxes and I realized that there were so many books. And at first I thought they were copies of Getting By or recognized voices of bisexual men themselves, both bisexual anthologies. But what I was finding were all these other bi plus titles that I have never heard of. For instance, I found a copy of Bisexual Politics, Theories, Queries, and Visions, which is a great title, and it was edited by Naomi Tucker. I'd never heard of this book before. I also found a copy of Bisexual Women in the 21st Century, edited by Dawn Atkins, and I'd never heard of that book either. And the thing that makes me upset, and I hope makes you upset too, is that these books aren't stocked anywhere. If you were to look them up, you might be able to find a PDF of them, you might be able to find them on Amazon, but they're not stocked in major stores. If you go to any bookstore right now and you go to the queer section, you may, if you are lucky, find a single copy of a bi plus book. It'll probably be something that's published in the last 5 years. And don't get me wrong, that is an important resource, but it's also not the only resource. Bi plus people have been writing their own stories for as long as stories have been around, right? And it feels weird to come on here and say, look at this book, I want you to read this book. But of course I want you to read this book. I want you to review this book. I want you to help make this book feel like a legitimate form of literature, because it is. But also, I'm saying this is a piece of activism. Publishing an anthology is advocacy. I'm saying that bi plus voices matter. And something that we all know in this room is how much the bi plus experience and identity actually encompasses. So yes, I am sitting here telling you that a book can create community. There are 36 creators here that will always be united because of this project. And they don't all live in the same country. They will probably never meet, but that's okay because their work is represented here in these pages. You know, I've got Where Is My Path by Anonymous, someone who's not ready to come out yet, and that's all right. I've got Cass Metcalf's Inner Critic, which is a super meta piece, a poem that they then corrected and add commentary to. We've also got Freeze Frames by Patricia Silva, fabulous photography here, and then by my own late great bi plus godmother, Carol Moses, I Feel Alone. These people will always be connected to one another because of this project. And that is powerful in itself. And in a time and place where, honestly, fascism is on the rise across the world, and not only in the United States, but especially here in the United States, even that is an act of rebellion. Is this ability to say, I am going to write my experience. I am going to tell my truth. And I don't even mean that in a pedantic sort of way. This is real advocacy. This is real activism. And I wish that all of you watching this, in addition to supporting bi plus voices, which, sorry, icky, gross plug, hate that. But, you know, if you were to get this book and read this book and to share it with your community, you would probably have another bi plus person say, oh my God, I resonated with that. Because that's already happened. I've had people reach out to me, readers reach out to me saying, that is so me. I couldn't believe how much Corey Tatz's piece resonated with me, which the non-consenting outcast, a bi man's narrative, is excellent and a really hard read, but everyone should read it. And then in these fiction stories, people see themselves, and when they see themselves, it empowers them to come out, it empowers them to speak out. Perhaps one of the most amazing things that I have seen in my time as the director for the Bi Plus Book Gang is members who come in who say, I'm out to my partner, start going to Pride, who start advocating, who start leading their own groups. You have no idea what a single acorn can do. And if given enough time and care, it will become an oak tree. And maybe that's my hope as the editor of a book like this, and perhaps even the editor of future iterations of By All Accounts, is that, you know, this project will feed another project, will feed an artist that will do this, will do that, will do this, will do that. And I don't think, especially in times like these, anyone should doubt the power of a single act. And so as we are all together for the rest of this conference and going forward, consider, what is your single act? What are you contributing to? And how can you support bi+ people around the world? Thank you so much for listening to me chat about By All Accounts. I would love it if you bought it, reviewed it, got it out there so that people take me fucking seriously when I go to a bookstore and say, hey, will you stock this Bi+ book? And they say, it only has 2 reviews, whatever. And if you're interested in joining the Bi+ Book Gang, you are more than welcome. You can hit me up at admin@biplusbookgang.com. You can look us up on the internet, on Instagram. We post there a lot, on Threads, whatever. I'd love to meet you. I'd love to talk. I'd love to connect, because community starts with what? A single person. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a fabulous rest of your conference.